Let's think of a scenario where we are required to determine what the most important book is in the history of humankind, right? What is the most important book? Well, there would be some debate and some discussion about that, but I think a lot of people would agree that in terms of influence over time and influence globally, all around the world, influence on many cultures, I think that a lot of people would agree that probably the most important book ever put together in human history is the Bible. Now let's change the scenario a bit. So let's say we have agreement that the Bible is the most important book ever put together in the history of humanity. And then the question is, well, what are the 5 most important parts of the Bible, right? So for some reason we can't keep the whole Bible. We have to take out 5 parts. What are the 5 central parts of the Bible that are the most important? So here we're talking about the most important parts of the most important book. Again, there's going to be a lot of discussion and debate, but I think that there would be pretty general agreement that one of the most important parts of this most important book is the very first section, what we now call the first 3 chapters of Genesis. And these first 3 chapters in Genesis have to do with the creation of the world, the creation of humanity, the first dialogues that people have with each other and that people have with God. Really basic stuff, right? Included in the story is even where the names of the animals came from, right? So this is a really, basic part of the most important book that probably has ever been put together in the history of humanity. The very first sentence is a great first sentence for the very beginning of the most important book ever put together in the history of humanity. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. So it's hard to get more basic than that as a starting line, as a first statement. Up above is Hebrew there, and this is an ancient Hebrew text, and so it's originally written, of course, in an ancient Hebrew language. Genesis, the first 3 chapters of Genesis, these are part of a sacred text, and you can come to the text and ask then theological questions. What is God like? What is the character of God? How does God work, etc.? Of course, at the same time, Genesis, these first 3 chapters of Genesis, are also historical documents. We just said they were written in an ancient Hebrew language, a very different language from English. They were written at a certain point in ancient history, in a certain part of the world with a certain climate, right? And so these are historical documents as well, and therefore we can ask anthropological questions. What does this document tell us about ideas that people had at the time? So you can come to the text and you can ask theological questions. You can come to the text and you can ask questions about people, that is, anthropological questions. I think for this discussion, let's set the theological questions aside. They're very important questions, but for this particular discussion, let's focus on the anthropological questions. So if we look at those first 3 chapters of Genesis and refer to them as a text, what does the text tell us about this ancient people? That is, about the ancient people from whom the text sprang. So from the purely human point of view, you have a human being writing a text, right? And that text is written in this ancient language, and now we refer to it as chapter 1, 2, 3 of the book of Genesis. But what does the text tell us about that ancient people, about how they saw the world, about their perception of the universe? So according to this text, how did those people see the world? How did they understand the universe? What did they think about God? What was their perception of God? What understanding of human nature does the text seem to convey? What are the people like in the document? What kinds of things do the people do in the document, in the text? And what do those things suggest about people? Remember, this is a foundational text, right? In the beginning, right? So in the beginning, and then, the text goes. So foundational ideas here, foundational ideas about the way the universe works, foundational ideas about God and the way God works, foundational ideas about people. So what does the text suggest about all of these things? Let's look at it in another way. Suppose a space alien was required to give a report about human beings, right? So on some distant planet, the king of the planet has demanded that such and such space alien give a report to the government of that planet about human beings. And so the alien goes to the archives, the folder labeled Human Beings, Earth, and the only document in the file is chapter 1, 2, and 3 of Genesis. That's all the alien has to go on. And so this alien gives a report on human beings based on this solitary document. So according to this text, what is the universe like from the perspective of the people who are described in the document, from the perspective of the person who wrote the document? What is the being called God like? Right? So the alien, as he or she is making this report, says, well, the document refers to this being called God, and this is what that God is like. And what are people like? Okay? So what we're doing here is we're not asking ourselves, what does the text say? We're asking ourselves, what does the text mean? Right? So being able to read a text and to say what it says, that's a really important skill that most people who have lived on this planet have not had, right? Historically, illiteracy is the norm. Historically, the overwhelming majority of people have not known how to read. It never would have occurred to them that they needed to know how to read. So if all we're able to do is just read a text and say, oh, here's what the text says, that by itself is a pretty big deal. But we're talking about doing something that's harder, but that maybe is a little more interesting as well once we've learned how to read. And that is, we ask the question, not just what does the text say, but what does the text mean? What is the underlying meaning, right? That's what this alien has to do. He reports on what the text says, but then he interprets it and says, and here's what the text means. Let me give you an example. One of the things we see in the first 3 chapters of this foundational document, the book of Genesis, the beginning of the book of Genesis, within this foundational book, the Bible, one of the things we see is that it seems to be very orderly. This is the text, certainly the first chapter, you can easily put it into bullet form. Day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6, day 7. Very orderly. And so you can imagine the space alien saying, according to this text, which is the only text we have from human beings, the universe is orderly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And that gives us information about how the people responsible for this ancient text, how they saw the universe. When they looked up at the universe, what did they see? Well, at least according to this text, they saw order. And what did that order of the universe reflect? It reflects a God, this being that the text calls God. This being is orderly because the orderliness that we see in this document, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, that springs from God. So we can imagine the space alien saying human beings are, when they look at the universe, they see order. And when they think about this being called God, they see a being they think about a being that's very orderly, right? Now there are a lot of other things you can say. This is just one thing. A lot of other things you can say, but this is just an example of the sort of thing we might say? Then when it comes to people, we see later on in the text, here we're moving on into, I think, chapter 3, right? So near the end of this excerpt from Genesis. Well, there have been some problems, and the people have gotten themselves into a little trouble. We've got two human beings that we're reading about here. They've gotten themselves into a little bit of trouble. They were not supposed to eat fruit from a certain tree, and they did. And so God says to the man, he says, "Have you eaten from the tree that I commanded you not to eat from?" And the man said, "The woman you put here with me, ... So what the man does is deflect, right? God asks the guy, "Did you do this?" And the man's response is, "Well, you gave me this woman and she did blah, blah, blah," right? Then the Lord God said to the woman, "What is this you have done?" And the woman said, "The serpent," right? What we see here is the human propensity for passing blame, passing responsibility onto others, deflecting, right? So if I were the alien, I would say, well, one of the things we see about these human beings is that they have an interest in order. When they look at the universe, they see order. At the very least, they're capable of noticing order. It appears that they appreciate order. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? Bullet point story. Well, and then also, one of the things we see about human beings is that, one of the things to kind of back up a little bit is they have a capacity for making really bad decisions, all right? And that's one of the things we see in this story. But then after making bad decisions, they have a tendency to pass the blame onto others, to cast blame on others. Do you see how that gives us a little bit of information? Now, notice that the text itself never specifically says that. The text describes what the people do, but it doesn't go on to say, "And therefore we conclude that people have the tendency to cast blame on one another." No. We're reading what the text says, and then we're asking ourselves, what does the text mean, right? So that first bit's important. Literacy, that's good. But now we're talking about a deeper kind of literacy. What does the text mean? What is the text, not just what does the text say, but what is the text saying? So there's a lot going on. And as we ask these questions, coming back to our alien friend, all the alien has to go on as he's reporting on people, as he's reporting on human beings and the way they see the universe and the nature of human beings, the only thing he has to go on are these first 3 chapters of Genesis. What would he find? What would he say? So we're doing this work. We're asking not just what the text says, but what the text means, right? And this is a very, very important skill. Reading is great. Knowing what a text says, great. But we want to also be able to ask, and what is the text saying? What does it mean? We want to work at that. And as we work with this, we can gain some insight into this ancient people, the ancient Hebrews, their view of human nature, their view of the universe.